Welcome to this next video in which we are discussing the vestibular system. Okay, so in this video what I want to now talk about is the vestibulospinal reflex, also known as the VSR. So let me start by reminding you of what the vestibulospinal reflex is in case you have forgotten since the beginning of this video. So, let me draw a little man here. So this little man is currently standing up. The vestibulospinal reflex is all about stabilizing the standing posture in the face of some sort of stimulus that is pro you falling over or is anti the standing up posture. Okay, so potentially some other person could come and give him an unsuspected push from behind, or potentially the wind could be very strong and could be pushing him. So some sort of stimulus though is going to push him, and of course what that's going to result in is a little bit of a deviation in his position, in his posture. So he's going to deviate over to the side, and what the vestibulospinal reflex is all about is trying to prevent you from actually falling over when that happens, because you are at risk now of falling over. So what is actually going to happen to try and stabilize the standing position? We are going to increase the muscle tone to a whole bunch of anti-gravity muscles. So a really important concept is the concept of muscle tone. So muscle tone refers to a tonic stimulation of skeletal muscles. So when you are standing up, there are certain skeletal muscles that are contracting at a low level all the time. Okay, so muscles in your legs in particular, and also your trunk region. There are loads of these muscles that have to contract at a low level. They're not contracting as hard as they possibly could. They're contracting at a sort of medium to lowish level continuously, and that's needed in order to keep you standing up. Okay, because that stimulation is occurring tonically, i.e. there are continuously alpha motor neurons firing and stimulating these muscles to maintain a contracted state for a long time potentially. If you stand up for hours and hours and hours, this will have to go on for hours and hours and hours. For that reason, it is referred to as muscle tone. So muscle tone refers to a tonic stimulation of skeletal muscle cells over a long period of time. So in the standing posture, there will be a certain pattern of muscle tone for loads of the different muscles in the body. What's going to happen is, as part of the vestibulospinal reflex, you are going to temporarily increase that muscle tone, increase that stimulation to certain muscles that are anti-gravity muscles, muscles that are really important for you being able to stand up. And as I said right at the start, I don't want to go through all of the different muscles, but we'll just summarize them all as anti-gravity muscles. Okay, so you're going to increase stimulation to anti-gravity muscles, muscles that are important for you maintaining the standing posture. And just so that you have some examples here, I'll go over the same examples that I went through earlier. So for instance, the quadricep muscles in the thigh are really important anti-gravity muscles. Remember, those extend the knee joint, and of course having the knee joint extended is really important for you to maintain the standing posture. In addition, the hamstring muscles, which are really important for making sure that the hip joint is flexed, those are really important for you maintaining the standing posture. And you can feel these muscles on yourself. If you feel your own thigh, you can feel the quadriceps muscles in the front and the hamstring muscles behind, and you can feel that there's a sort of tension, especially in the hamstring muscles. If you have a feel of your the posterior portion of your thigh, you will be able to feel that tension that's there when you're standing up in the hamstring muscles, semitendinosus and semimembranosus, or whatever their names are. Okay, so those are some examples of muscles that are anti-gravity muscles. There are loads of other ones as well, but those are very famous ones that you're likely to remember from anatomy class. Okay, so anti-gravity muscles, these are involved in you maintaining the standing posture. They'll have a certain muscle tone when you are in the standing position, and then if some force comes along that's going to promote you falling over, the vestibulospinal reflex is all about temporarily increasing the stimulation to these anti-gravity muscles to try and make sure that you don't fall over, to try and correct that tilt of the body that this stimulus has produced and prevent you from falling over. Okay, so that's the vestibulospinal reflex, a description of it anyway. Let's now actually see how it's going to work. So, when your entire body tilts, so imagine we have had this push here and your entire body is tilting, and I'm going to draw this out really extremely. I mean, if you actually tilted to this side, the vestibulospinal reflex is probably a little bit past being able to help you, or maybe not, maybe that's not too extreme tilt, but you've tilted over to this side now. Okay, what's actually going to happen to the vestibular systems on both sides of the head? So I'll just draw in pink here, those look like eyes, but they're meant to be representing the fact that we have a vestibular system here and a vestibular system here. What's actually going to be happening there? Well, of course, the otitive organs, they're going to change their firing patterns, okay? And most likely you're going to get lots of bipolar neurons potentially activated by this tilting to one side. So certain bipolar neurons are going to be activated, which innervate hair cells of the otitive organs when you actually tilt to one side like this and you're no longer in the normal standing upright position. In addition, you would expect some of the semicircular canals potentially to be activated by this movement. Okay, in particular, maybe the anterior and posterior semicircular canals will get a little bit of activation by you tilting over to this side. If you tilted forwards, you could imagine that maybe the horizontal one might get a little bit of stimulation by that. Okay, so a little bit of stimulation might occur in some of these semicircular canals as well. The point is that certain bipolar neurons that innervate certain hair cells in certain sensory apparatuses of the vestibular system are going to become activated, whereas they were not activated before. So you will get some bipolar neurons now firing very rapidly, which weren't firing when we were in this upright, nice, stable position. Okay, and these ones are the bipolar neurons that are going to take part in the vestibulospinal reflex. Of course, some bipolar neurons might actually be inactivated by you tilting. Those are not the ones that are going to take part in the vestibulospinal reflex. Okay, ones that were activated when you were in the upright posture and are inactivated maybe by the tilt now, those are not going to be part of the vestibulospinal reflex. It's going to be the ones that are activated when the body tilts over. Okay, so these are going to, of course, send their central processes into the vestibular nuclear complexes, and they're going to branch off, and innervate loads of neurons, and we've seen neurons that will go up through the vestibulo-thalamo-cortical pathway to give the information to the cerebral cortex, and we've seen neurons that will go up and be part of the vestibulo-ocular reflex pathway. Now what I want to look at is neurons that are going to be part of the vestibulospinal reflex pathway. Now, which vestibular nuclei are going to be involved in the vestibulospinal reflex pathway? Well, it's going to be the medial and the lateral vestibular nuclei. Okay, so if I draw one of the vestibular nuclear complexes here, and we'll do all of it on the right-hand side, but the same thing will be happening on the left-hand side. So here is the superior vestibular nucleus, the lateral vestibular nucleus, and the inferior vestibular nucleus. The two that we're going to be interested in are the lateral vestibular nucleus and the medial vestibular nucleus here. Okay, and both of these are going to be part of the vestibulospinal reflex, particularly the lateral vestibular nucleus. Right, so what I now want to show is how is this going to work. So there's going to be two descending tracts that axons from these second-order neurons in these nuclei are going to go into. One is going to be called the lateral vestibulospinal tract, and the other is going to be called the medial vestibulospinal tract. Okay, so lateral vestibulospinal tract, and also the medial vestibulospinal tract. And for short, vestibulospinal tract can be abbreviated down to VST. So I will use that abbreviation with regards to the medial one, so the medial vestibulospinal tract. So there's going to be these two descending tracts that are going to carry axons from the second-order neurons that are in these nuclei down into the spinal cord, so vestibulospinal, from the vestibular system to the spinal cord. Okay, and there they'll be able to influence the activity of alpha motor neurons innervating skeletal muscles of these anti-gravity nature. Okay, so the lateral vestibular nucleus, it will send its second order neurons into the lateral vestibulospinal tract, and the medial vestibular nucleus, it will send its neurons that are going to be part of this vestibulospinal reflex into the medial vestibulospinal tract. So this all makes nice sense. Okay, so let me just draw a little bit of this on. So let's say we've got our bipolar neuron here. Okay, and this is one of these bipolar neurons that's going to be activated by you tilting. So it innervates some hair cell that will be activated when the body moves from the upright posture to a tilted posture. Okay, and here it goes, it's branching, and let's say it's given a branch off to both of these vestibular nuclei. And it might have far more branches than that, but for the basis of our picture, we'll just have these two branches here. Okay, and in these nuclei, there is going to be second order neurons. So here are their cell bodies there, that we can make those black dots the nuclei, and here are the cell bodies, and then their axons will go downwards. Okay, down. This one will go into what's called the lateral vestibulospinal tract, and this one will go into the medial vestibulospinal tract, and they'll descend down through the medulla and then into the spinal cord. And I want to show you the position of these vestibulospinal tracts in the spinal cord. So let me now give you a picture. So I'll draw it here so I can continue it on, of the spinal cord. So this is going to be a transverse cross-section of the spinal cord, and we'll make it the cervical spinal cord for reasons that you'll see in just a moment. So this is a cervical portion of the spinal cord. So at the back, that is the dorsal median sulcus there, and at the front we should actually have a little fissure like this. So let me write on the annotations here. So this is the dorsal median sulcus at the back, so this little sort of invagination here. Okay, just a few landmarks of the spinal cord anatomy I'm going over now. This is the ventral median fissure of the spinal cord, and it's a reasonably sensible name. Okay, median means in the middle, ventral means towards the front. Okay, so we're away from the brain now, so ventral and dorsal have their normal meanings. And then sulcus is a more appropriate description for what this is, and fissure is a more appropriate description for what this is. Okay, so here is this transverse cross-section of the spinal cord. Now let me mark on the grey matter. So the grey matter, remember, has this characteristic shape, like so. Here are the dorsal horns, the ventral horns here, like so, and then the commissure in the middle with the spinal canal right in the middle there. So that's the spinal canal. Okay, and then surrounding the grey matter you have white matter. So all of this is white matter, this is white matter, this is white matter, and these are the dorsal columns where the ascending tracts of the dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway will be. These are the lateral columns here. These are the anterior columns here, and this sort of space here is often called the anterolateral white matter columns. Okay, so let's now see where the lateral and medial vestibulospinal tracts will be. We'll start off with the lateral one because this is more famous. So there is a lateral, the lateral vestibulospinal tract is in this position here. It's in the anterior white matter column, like so. Now this tract, you often won't see it called the lateral vestibulospinal tract when you're looking at it anatomically. Physiologically, you would call it the lateral vestibulospinal tract. Anatomically, you would not call this the lateral vestibulospinal tract, you would just call it the vestibulospinal tract. Okay, because the medial vestibulospinal tract is actually going to be in a different white matter tract. It's going to have a different name anatomically. So this was named anatomically long ago, and then we realised that there were these two different tracts that were part of the vestibulospinal reflex. So we called the one that actually is in the anatomic vestibulospinal tract the lateral one, because it comes from the lateral vestibular nucleus, and we called the one that's in a different white matter tract, and I don't know why I'm hiding the name of this other white matter tract. It's in this position here, and it's the continuation of something we've seen already. It's the continuation of the medial longitudinal fasciculus. So this is where the medial longitudinal fasciculus continues on downwards in the cervical spinal cord. It doesn't go all the way down the spinal cord, it just goes down in the cervical regions. Okay, whereas the full vestibulospinal tract here goes right down. So if I draw a little picture of the spinal cord here, the vestibulospinal tracts would go right down, like so, whereas the medial longitudinal fasciculi, they would end up in the cervical region. Okay, so they just descend down in the cervical portion. So the medial vestibulospinal tract, this physiologic connection between the medial vestibular nucleus and alpha motor neurons in the spinal cord, the axons of that are actually running in the anatomic medial longitudinal fasciculus. The lateral vestibular spinal tract, the physiological name for this connection between the lateral vestibular nucleus and the alpha motor neurons in the spinal cord, that is running through this anatomic vestibulospinal tract. So I hope that is clear. Okay, so this axon here then, it's going to go into the vestibulospinal tract, and it's part of this lateral vestibulospinal tract, and this axon here, it'll go into the medial longitudinal fasciculus like that and descend downwards. Okay, so a point to note here, the connection is ipsilateral, so the neurons that are in the right vestibular nucleus will go down on the right side of the spine and will innervate alpha motor neurons on the right side of the body. Okay, and I'm absolutely sure that it doesn't cross over this time. Okay, so it's ipsilateral. Okay, so let's now have a look at what's going to happen then. So what are these second order neurons actually going to innervate then? Well, they're going to eventually leave their tracts, so either the vestibulospinal tract or the medial longitudinal fasciculus. They'll leave them and innervate alpha motor neurons, which of course will have their cell bodies in the ventral horn of the spinal cord, will send their axons out in the ventral root, and then it will go into the mixed spinal nerve. Okay, so this is an alpha motor neuron here, and it will activate one of these anti-gravity muscles. Now, the axons that are coming down in the medial vestibulospinal tract, i.e. in the medial longitudinal fasciculus, I've said that the medial longitudinal fasciculus only goes down in the cervical spinal cord, and therefore these must have to come out in the cervical spinal cord and will innervate alpha motor neurons in the cervical spinal cord. And they're actually going to innervate alpha motor neurons that will innervate anti-gravity muscles of the neck. So the medial vestibulospinal tract is all about anti-gravity muscles in the neck. Okay, so neck anti-gravity muscles. Whereas the lateral vestibulospinal tract, that goes all the way down the spinal cord, and therefore the axons in that, they will be able to innervate alpha motor neurons all the way down the spinal cord, and therefore they'll innervate all the other anti-gravity muscles, so in particular the anti-gravity muscles down in the legs. Okay, so that's the way that this is actually going to work. So let me summarize it now. So when you move on a tilt, so when this initial stimulus, this destabilizing stimulus here, this awful destabilizing stimulus, puts your whole body on a tilt, certain hair cells in your two vestibular systems here will now become activated, which were not activated when you were in the upright stable position. Okay, these will send their central processes into the vestibular nuclear complexes, and this will be happening on either side. Okay, they'll give off lots of branches there, and they might innervate some neurons which are going to be participating in the vestibulospinal tract. These will have their cell bodies generally in the medial or the lateral vestibular nucleus. The ones from the medial vestibular nucleus, they're going to descend down in the medial longitudinal fasciculus, and this connection physiologically is called the medial vestibulospinal tract, and they will innervate alpha motor neurons that are in the cervical portion of the spinal cord, and which will innervate neck anti-gravity muscles. In contrast, the neurons that have their cell bodies in the lateral vestibular nucleus, they will descend down in the anatomic vestibulospinal tract, and this connection physiologically is called the lateral vestibulospinal tract, and they'll innervate alpha motor neurons all the way down the spinal cord, such as the anti-gravity muscles in the legs in particular, to stabilize you. So you'll get this increase in muscle tone in lots of these anti-gravity muscles, and that will promote you staying upright and try and stop you falling down. Okay, and that's the vestibulospinal reflex, and that now concludes this video on the vestibular system. We have seen the way that the vestibular system sensory apparatus actually transduces all of this interesting sensory information into electrical information that can in principle be interpreted by the brain and used for conscious awareness of the orientation of your head and the movements of your head, etc. We've seen the pathway by which this information is actually delivered from the vestibular nuclear complex up to the cerebral cortex. We've then had a look at these two really important reflexes, the vestibulo-ocular reflex, which is absolutely beautiful, and we looked at the fact that there are two vestibulo-ocular reflexes, the rotational and translational vestibulo-ocular reflex. We specifically studied the rotational vestibulo-ocular reflex because it's so well understood, and you can do it just with the information coming from the semicircular canals. We've seen the incredible circuitry that underlies that vestibulo-ocular reflex, which is very well understood. We then finally moved on to the vestibulospinal reflex, which is the stabilizing reflex, stabilizing you in the upright posture. I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope you learned a lot, and thank you for watching it.